Before we dive in, pause for a moment. Imagine hearing your child's voice 50 years from now, reading your grandparents' words and stories as though they were alive once more. That moment is possible, if we press record now. If you believe in preserving memories that outlast us, hit subscribe and share this journey with me. They say that time steals away everything except what we remember. But memory alone is frail, prone to forgetting names, dates, voices, the small inflections, the laughter in someone's tone. That is why we must record our grandparents, while they are here with us, while their voices are clear, their eyes still bright, their stories still fresh. This is not just about archiving facts. It is about preserving humanity, legacy, connection, something that will outlive us all. I still remember the first time I held the recorder in my trembling hands. My grandmother, Bibi Jahanara, sat in her favorite rocking chair by the window. The afternoon sun cast soft gold patterns on the lace curtains behind her. She had just returned from the garden, a light dusting of soil on her fingertips, and a jasmine petal tucked behind her ear. I asked her to tell me something about her childhood, anything. Her face softened. She placed her hands on the recorder as though she were blessing a newborn. "Beta," she said, "I was born in a small village near the river. We had no electricity, no radio, just the wind and the stories of our ancestors at night. My mother would light a clay lamp, and as its flame wavered, she'd tell me of how her mother came across with water from the mountains, how she walked for miles under stars, how she sang lullabies to soothe the night. Her voice trembled slightly, but it was strong. She told me about the irrigation canals they dug with bare hands, the monsoon floods that reshaped farm boundaries, the neighbors who would gather after dusk to sing folk songs." I pressed record. At first, the machine sputtered. I worried the batteries would die, or the device would fail. But her voice flowed, rich, warm, rhythmic. She laughed when she recalled playing in mud and slipping into the river as a child. She paused and wiped her eye when she spoke of her siblings passing away during the Big Famine. She coughed slightly when she remembered walking through cholera outbreaks without doctors nearby. The tape rolled on for an hour, then two. I sat quietly, wanting to drink in every detail. When she finally paused to rest, she looked at me and said, "You've captured my heart, Beta." After that day, I made it my mission. Every weekend I visited her and my grandfather, Baba Shafiq. I asked them stories about how they met, how they built their home, how they survived partition and war, how they made ends meet. Slowly I built a collection. Not just high points but small moments. How the rain sounded on the tin roof, how my grandmother dusted the floor with earth, how my grandfather whittled a wooden toy for his grandchildren. I recorded their voices, their storms, their laughter. I recorded their silences, their sighs, their longing. Here is the thing. In those recordings, I heard voices I never thought I would. I heard my grandmother humming a lullaby, one she said her mother sang, and I recognized a fragment I had heard before in my own dreams. I heard my grandfather's voice crack when he spoke of losing friends in war. I heard him quietly apologize for the times he couldn't provide, for the nights he stayed awake worrying we'd go hungry. I heard tender admonitions, gentle humor, the cadence of their regional accent. I heard nuances we would never capture in typed transcripts. One evening, as I sat with the recordings playing softly in the living room, my mother joined me. She listened to her mother's laughter, and tears glimmered in her eyes. I forgot how she spoke that word, she said, pointing at the recording when grandmother said, "Maya, my mother." I had heard it 1,000 times, but now I hear something new, the hesitation, the echo. And I miss her even more. My sister, who lives abroad, called in from another country. She put the speakerphone near the microphone and we all listened together, as though traveling through time to visit grandmother again. Recording them wasn't always easy. Sometimes my grandfather didn't feel well. Sometimes memories pained him. Sometimes they fell silent, unable to articulate what they felt. But I learned to wait, to be patient. I learned to ask gentle prompts. What did you see that day? How did that smell feel? And to sit through the silences. I learned to be the holder of space for their stories. Over months and years, the archive grew. Dozens of recordings, hours and hours, cataloged, backed up, transcribed. The recordings turned into our family's living archive. When my grandmother passed away, a hush fell in the house. I held her recorder and cried. But I knew she had left something enduring. I listened to her voice again and again, finding new depth in her stories, feeling her presence in the lines of her speech. My children, still small at the time, would ask me, "Did Bibi tell you that story about the river?" And I would put the recording on. They would sit, listening rapt, wide-eyed, as if she were there. And in those moments, she was. Why do we need to record our grandparents? Because once they are gone, their voices vanish from living memory. Even photographs fail to capture tone, inflection, that particular laugh or sigh. Written notes may distort or sanitize, memories fade or blend. But a recording preserves a moment in time, impermanent yet eternal, fragile yet resilient. It is the difference between saying, "She told me a story about walking through floodwaters," and hearing her say it, feeling her tremor, hearing the change in her breath. There were surprising discoveries in our recordings. On one tape, grandfather spoke of a neighbor who clandestinely sheltered refugees during wartime. That story was unknown to the family. Another tape revealed grandmother's deep love for classical poetry and songs she used to sing in her youth, songs she had never sung publicly. I realized she had suppressed her creative side for years, out of duty and survival. Now her voice sang again, in those recordings. When I played the tapes for younger cousins, they remarked at how different grandmother's voice sounded from what they had imagined. Some had never met her, others only saw her frail in old age. But hearing her voice at 50, strong, lyrical, sharp, something shifted in them. They passed the recordings to their children. Slowly the stories disseminated. A cousin created a CD compilation. Another cousin made a digital archive with subtitles and photos. I watched tears, laughter, silences ripple as people listened, as if meeting their roots for the first time. A few years later, I gave a talk at a university about oral history. I brought my recorder and gave examples of how recording grandparents helps preserve not only personal history but community memory. Students asked, "What about permission?" I replied simply, "Record while you can. Be ethical, be kind, but don't wait. Because if you wait until they are too old, or too ill, or when they have passed, you lose their voice forever." People sometimes argue, but what about privacy? What if they share something they don't want public? That's valid. That's why the recordings are first for your family. You respect boundaries. You don't broadcast everything online unless they consent or family agrees. But you still record privately, archive privately. That way you don't lose the memory. Later, if a story is appropriate to share, with consent, you can share. The primary aim is preservation, not exposure. One day, my daughter, then 12, asked, "Grandpa, tell me how you met Grandma again." He smiled, and without hesitation he recounted that familiar story, how they were introduced by cousins, how he visited her home under the guise of borrowing sugar, how they walked in the orchard, how he proposed under a moonlit sky. I recorded it. She listened happily. Later she said, "One day when I'm old, I'll play this for my children, and I'll think of Bibi and Baba." In that moment, the chain extended. Voice to child, child to future. Several years after grandmother's passing, I decided to illustrate a small booklet combining her stories and excerpts from recordings. I used quotes from her voice, interspersed with reflections from family members, old photographs, and regional maps. It became something like a memoir, not just mine, but collective. In the booklet's introduction, I wrote, "Let this be the inheritance I leave my children, not gold, but voice, not jewelry, but story, not land, but memory." I gave that booklet at family gatherings. As cousins turned pages, they nodded, smiled, cried. One cousin said, "I never knew about this spring in grandmother's village. I never knew about your uncle's early journey to the city." Another said, "Listening to her voice is like waking her again in the house." Time passed. The children grew. Some moved to other cities, even other countries. But the recordings traveled with them. They took the digital files, they mailed CDs, they shared snippets on family chat groups, always captioned, "Listen to Bibi here." On holidays, we would gather, play the recordings, and let the voices echo in our living rooms. Younger generations would ask questions. Why did she say this? What kind of shoes did she wear? What was the orchard like? And then elders would answer, drawing more stories. The recordings became family anchors. When grandparents' generation had no one left, the recordings became bridges. Grandchildren who had never met them knew them through voice. They learned how their great-grandparents spoke, thought, felt. They learned regional slang, idioms, proverbs, accent. They learned how those ancestors loved, struggled, remade themselves through upheavals. The recordings became their inheritance. I've thought often, what are we leaving behind if we don't preserve such voices? We might leave property, money, photos, but missing the voice, the timbre, the laughter is like leaving behind a river without water, a tree without leaves, a song without melody. Future generations might wonder, who were these people? What sounded like them? They might look at photos and wonder how they spoke, how they laughed, how they cried. They'll wonder what stories died with them. Recording grandparents is also an act of love. It tells them, your life matters. Your stories matter. Even when you feel old, overlooked, inconsequential, your voice matters. To receive their story is to honor them, to listen, to bear witness. It restores dignity, connection, perspective. They see someone caring enough to listen, to preserve, to pass forward. When friends hear about what I've done, many say, I wish I had recorded my grandmother before she passed. I say, don't wait. Ask today to record. Bring the recorder, a phone, or any voice app. Sit, ask open questions. Ask gently. Let silence rest. Let them speak. Let the words come. Even if they falter, even if they decline at first, keep bringing it up. Ask for small stories. What games did you play as a child? Who was your best friend? What smells remind you of your home? Over time, the walls of reticence break. Memories flow. Even if just 10 minutes, that 10 minutes is treasure. I remember recording grandmother telling a story in fragments, about how her father used to carve wooden toys for her children during winters. She spoke of the smell of pine wood shavings, of his small workshop in a corner, of her delight and pride in that handmade gift. That fragment was only 5 minutes, but inside it lay layers. Craftsmanship, childhood joy, a father's devotion, a cultural tradition. Without that recording, I might never have known of that workshop at all. One evening, while cataloging the tapes, I listened to a recording from years ago. I heard grandmother telling a story about a drought. Suddenly she stopped and said, I wish I had kept a diary. I wish I had written. I paused the tape and leaned back. You did, I whispered. You spoke it, and I recorded it. In that moment, the power of the act struck me deeply. That recorder was more than a machine. It was a time machine, a vessel, a bearer of souls. To those reading or listening, recording your grandparents is not some optional hobby. It is essential. It is urgency. Each day they age, the risk grows that memory will fail, that voice will fade, that stories will become irretrievable. Do not trust fragile memory alone. Do not assume someone else will do it. Do it yourself. Let me tell you one more story. Years after my grandmother died, I was sorting through old audio files. I stumbled upon a short recording I hadn't listened to in a while. It was her singing a lullaby in her voice, slightly off-key, with cracks, laughs, and gentle mistakes. I played it for my nephew, then just a toddler. He paid attention, quiet. Then he said, play more. In his tiny voice, I heard longing, fascination. He asked me, who is that singing? I told him, that is your great-grandmother. He said, I want to hear her every night. And so I did, until he grew old enough to understand, to ask questions, to record his own life. Today, that lullaby recording is one of our most precious treasures. On a night when someone misses her, we play it. When we gather, we play it. Sometimes we all sing along, trying to match the wobble, the crack, the accent. Sometimes it makes us laugh, sometimes it makes us cry. But always it fills the room with her presence. In that spirit, I encourage you, start now. Pull out your phone, press record, ask a question. Grandma, can you tell me about your childhood home? Let them speak, let them wander, let their voice emerge. Save that file, back it up, label it with date, name, topic. Transcribe if possible, share with family, respect boundaries, but preserve what you can. Imagine future generations discovering this voice. Your child's child, maybe great-grandchild, listening to your grandmother speak, and feeling a connection across decades. That moment, that pause between past and present, is priceless. And so, Let me leave you with this. Record while you can. Preserve while there is still voice. Because once silence claims them, their stories fade. Time cannot be reversed, but we can build bridges. Press record, hold the microphone, ask, listen, and record. Let their voices live on. If this story moved you, even a little, take a moment right now, pick up your phone or any recording device and reach out to your grandparent or elder. Ask them to tell a small story. Record it, save it, share it, and before you leave, subscribe to this channel or newsletter so that together we can build a living archive of voices, your family's voices, my family's voices, our shared heritage. Don't wait. The time is now.